not a knock on Microsoft, but, this is a spoiler alert. In selling $1 billion over a 5-year period, obviously I didn't get paid, 1/10 of 1% of commission because it just didn't happen. I didn't make the king's ransom there, but it was a learning experience for me. And I had to reflect on this after that 5-year period. I'm like, wow, I just sold $1 billion. Asked people, who else has sold $1 billion? Found out that it was a pretty rare accomplishment in and of itself.
Joe Paranteau, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Amazing, right?
I got a question for you. It's like, where does someone that's a member of a Chippewa tribe, the Little Shell tribe, okay, end up working for a big giant company leading sales, a company like Microsoft? How does that story happen?
It's a great story. And for my family members, they know me as Ozamakwa, Brown Bear. I'm really the first generation to grow up outside the reservation. My dad and aunts and uncles, everyone, spent their, half their life on the reservation, left. And so I'm a product of living in two worlds. And one of those worlds, I discovered, college and education. I was the first one to go to college. What's interesting is I may actually be the first Native American business author in history. Most Native Americans, when they write books, they don't write about business because when you think about it, it's a byproduct of, education. They haven't been, this stuff it's not history that we read about in books. My aunts and uncles, were put into boarding school against their will to learn new language and to forget their old language. So this was something that happened in, kind of my lifetime in the 50s and 60s. This wasn't long ago. And so for me, my trip started, nobody told me go to college. I went in the military. I had bad grades. I went to 6 high school. So I got great SATs. I had 1460 SAT and a 1.6 grade average. So colleges had no idea what to do with that. They were like, But I went in the military and I found that all the officers were driving BMWs. They had the officers club. And I said, what's an officer? How do I get to become an officer in the Air Force? And I learned it was all about going to college. So I had some officers who mentored me, helped encourage me to go to college. And I started right there when I was in the Air Force. So after I got out of the Air Force, I just continued college, found out that I had had a background in technology from the Air Force. I used to fix air traffic control radar and navigational systems. Didn't like that as much as I liked being the public affairs office, coordinator for our unit. Loved talking to people, and I got a degree in communication. And after I got out, I found out, it was technology was hot. Software was, enterprise software was coming into its own, and people were needed who could talk technology and, engage customers. And I found a home there. It was great timing. I got to work with Silicon Valley companies when they were first starting out. So companies like Oracle, Sun Microsystems, Borland, SCO Unix, those were all some of my early customers. Adobe, when they were startups, HP, Intel, some of the biggest companies we have today, I knew when they were not so big.
So your book is titled $1 Billion Sales Secrets, Superstar Selling Tips for All Seasons. So this has a designation that I didn't know until you told me that. That's amazing. So in here you talk about you've sold $1 billion worth of stuff, and that's with Microsoft. You've been with them so long time. And it's like, could you not have picked a more difficult, competitive industry that just grinds salespeople down?
Yeah, it's a challenging industry, but I've been thankful to be with Microsoft for a long time and through many different iterations of my career. But the story for $1 Billion Sales Secrets, in my career here, I've decided to chase bigger and bigger quotas. Who does that? I mean, that's a salesperson who says, I'd really like to get the experiences of running more businesses at scale as a seller. So when and I also love startups, kind of an entrepreneur inside of Microsoft. So this business that I was part of, I had the opportunity to work with most of the healthcare providers in America. And my quota was anywhere between 250 million to 400 million annual. When you break that down, that's like, $2.5 million a day from a selling day perspective. And afterwards, not a knock on Microsoft, but, this is a spoiler alert. In selling $1 billion over a 5-year period, obviously I didn't get paid, 0.1% of commission because it just didn't happen. I didn't make the king's ransom there, but it was a learning experience for me. And I had to reflect on this after that 5-year period. And I'm like, wow, I just sold $1 billion. Asked people, who else has sold $1 billion? Found out that it was a pretty rare accomplishment in and of itself. Many people, in Microsoft will run businesses that are $1 billion. That's kind of an easy thing to do, but they've got teams of salespeople. And it's not to say that, I didn't do this, with the help of hundreds of people. I did. However, it was my number. This was my number that I was staring down. And it's a number that's big. To put it in reference, when Tableau got purchased by Salesforce.com, their annual revenue was this amount that I had sold. So it was an entire company with their sales force had sold this, this amount of revenue, and I was doing it solo. So it's kind of something that I was proud of, but it made me think about sales and what did I do consciously and unconsciously, and what can I give back to people? What's the learning that, I've been through in all these seasons, ups and downs, through Hurricane Katrina, through 2008, financial meltdown. It's difficult being out there, not only in just technology, lots of industries, going through the grinds of the ups and downs in sales. And so how could I share something with the audiences that they would find valuable, that they could take and actually leverage?
So your sales career started off when you were a little kid. You would take rocks and paint them and sell them as paperweights.
Like this. It's my rock. I did. We didn't grow up with hardly anything. I remember as a kid, we'd go to the grocery store. And if anyone grew up poor, they can relate to this, but we'd go to get cereal, and it was the generic grocery store. So literally the cereal would be in a white container and it would say cereal. You'd get something else and it would say potatoes. But it was always like puffed wheat. It was horrible. So when I went into the military, I remember I found like Fruity Pebbles. That was my favorite.
So where does this sales desire come from? Is it from your grandmother? Is it where did you inherit it?
For me, selling at that age, I recognized the state of affairs. I knew we didn't have any money, and I recognized people who did have money. For anyone who's listening who grew up like this, if they're honest, they learned at an early age how to covet and be jealous. And it's a powerful emotion because some of my earliest thoughts and dreams were changing my life and not living the life that I was growing up in. Having something extra. We had a car that we drove. It was a Pinto. They were notorious for being unsafe cars, but ours was probably doubly unsafe. On the passenger side, it was rusted through at the bottom. And as we would drive down the road, I remember I would put my legs, kind of on the sides of the car, because if I didn't, I could actually look down and my foot would go through to the floorboard to hit the ground. I could see the ground running. It was kind of like a Fred Flintstone car in a way, because very dangerous, but taking your life in your own hands when you're driving that car. But I see things like that would encourage me and motivate me to do something more. So I was always hustling and doing things. One of my other schemes, if you remember Columbia House, this company would advertise in magazines, and they'd say, "Hey, get this many records for a penny." Well, I'm like 10 years old, and I get onto that thing, and I decide, hey, I'm going to set up a record shop and resell these records. I'm going to get them for a penny. I'm going to resell them for $1 a piece. And didn't realize I was signing up for this subscription service that my parents had to cancel. And, remember my mom saying, "He's only 10, what are you doing? Sending the stuff to a 10-year-old. That was the story of my life. So I was always selling. I was reluctant to get into sales. I wanted to go into public affairs, I thought, after a communication degree. Didn't think about sales as really a last resort. When I went to interview, I said, I think I like this job, but I don't understand if I'm right for sales. And one of my mentors, her name's Lorraine, she said, well, selling is really about helping people. Do you like to help people? I'm like, yeah, I love to help people. And I realized that through college, I was doing things that were sales activities. I worked for a stockbroker. I worked for a phone bank. I was doing, telemarketing for charities. And I got to see myself putting this career together, had been already in place. I was already doing these things well. I enjoyed it. People were blessed when I did it. And so I jumped in full force and started off my technology selling career and never looked back.
So you work for a company that I think most people default when they think of a business. They think of big companies like Microsoft or GM or AIG or whatever. But the truth is, and I always say that the invisible heroes of our time, I believe, are the entrepreneurs, the folks that actually go risk everything, their family's future, their future, and they start a business, but they end up there's 20 or less employees in most of the businesses in the US. And when you think about it, what do they have to do? They have to start a business. They have to figure out how to run it, how to buy, how to negotiate. But one of the things they have to figure out is marketing, but also sales. And you and I were talking before we started recording, and your book is actually to this audience, to the folks that are probably the most ill-equipped to hire and train and manage and expect a sales force to help them grow the value of their business. Where did you get convinced you needed to write a book for these folks?
I had started with the idea of, it's kind of planted by customers and people you work with, coworkers, and they're like, "Oh, you should write a book. You do things a little different than most people." But it was hitting this watermark of $1 billion in sales over a 5-year period that I said, okay, I must have something that's unique, because I don't know anyone who's sold $1 billion of anything to the market. So I've got something to contribute. I just need to figure out what it is. And when I started writing the book, I put Post-it notes all over my wall to organize my thoughts. Literally, my wife could have killed me, because my walls were Post-it notes, red, green, purple, pink, blue, every color in the world that I had Post-it notes on my wall. And it was in that moment, because I'd also realized I was going to start back to school and get my MBA in entrepreneurship, that this marketplace was ill-equipped to handle the demands of selling. Nobody's, entrepreneurs, they go and they learn about a lot of different things. The thing that they don't learn about is, one of the most important, 2 critical things that entrepreneurs do is they network a lot and they sell.
Mm-hmm.
They're selling their business ideas. They're selling to the banks. They're selling for partnerships. And a lot of these ideas will be helpful to them. It's kind of a handbook, goes through all the key components that you would need as an entrepreneur to be successful, presenting offers, um, working with partners, different types of things. And I really distilled it for that audience so that they could benefit. And the small and family businesses, family-owned businesses are about 80% of the global businesses today.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize that. They think of, the big companies, and actually some of those companies like Walmart, second generation company.
Yeah.
I think the biggest company in the world right now is a family-owned business. It really drives our economy. For the listeners out here, they've been struggling with their business during this time. And this book was ready to go last year at this time. On March 5th, I launched it a year later. And in that year, I knew last year I couldn't launch this book during COVID. I was calling and talking to customers who were literally crying on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
This was one of those watershed moments that we'll always remember. And I felt I needed to add some extra things in there to help people during this time, not only to recover their businesses, but to really enact different strategies for working with customers.